Welcome to the Executives Lounge. This is your podcast host, Kirsten and I. I am bringing you amazing stories from amazing women in leadership from across the globe. Let's get started. All right. We are here with Kirsten Burkhart. She lives in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. She's the executive director of AIDS Resource, and she's here today to talk with us about all things executive director, leadership, and her life. AIDS Resource is a nonprofit, community-based organization that provides HIV prevention programs, HIV testing, and assistance to those living with or affected by HIV. So I want to address something right away, Kirsten, which is there is still a stigma and misinformation about AIDS and HIV in our country. And so I wanted to mention here too, what people may not know is that treatment for HIV infection has become so effective that medication can drive down the virus counts in HIV patients so low that they can't transmit the virus to others. And so I also wanted to mention to the listeners, especially those that maybe didn't grow up in the 80s, Kirsten and I did. We both grew up in the 80s. And I remember watching on TV that every day, people were being diagnosed with HIV AIDS and they were dying. And so, Kirsten, I wanted to talk with you about that first and just kind of dive into this because your organization is doing incredibly important work and has been since really this was a crisis in our country. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me very much. You're right about the stigma, especially, I can speak especially to, we live in a very rural community. We serve 10 very rural communities, and the stigma here is very much the same that it was back when we were growing up in the 80s and you were seeing people dying on the news every night. I get hate letters occasionally in the mail, which is, ridiculous. I don't think the director of the Lung Association gets hate mail. Our offices have been vandalized. We actually just got a special grant to increase security at our office because we're opening a medical clinic for people living with HIV and members of the LGBTQ community, both heavily stigmatized in general and especially here. So stigma is something that we still fight every day. It's still a really big part of our work. I had breast cancer, like maybe 10 years ago. And I was already used to dealing with our clients' stigma, but I was really stricken after I had time to reflect on how people reacted to my diagnosis and treated me versus what our clients face every day. And it's, like the whole world came out of everywhere. Everyone wants to bring me covered dishes and cards and gift cards and where can they take me? And then our clients are many fearful of telling their families even because they don't know what the reaction is going to be, what support they're going to get. We have a client who was living with his family, but he had to live in the basement and he wasn't allowed to use their silverware. All of that really just, it comes from ignorance of not knowing how HIV spread, and that goes back to the day in the 80s where we didn't know what it was. Everything was terrifying, but we do know now. And we all need to do better about educating ourselves, how HIV is transmitted, what does it mean? And then just treating everyone with some basic compassion.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for diving into that. Like, right, me, I always try to dive into the deep end. There is no surface level conversation with me. And I think, it speaks to the importance of this podcast, right? Is we want to talk about the important issues and we want to talk about misinformation and what meaningfulness is and how to really provide supports to our communities and how do we contribute. I'd love to go back and really understand how you became an advocate as an executive director for AIDS Resource and really just kind of tell us your story about how you got to where you are today.
I've always had a soft spot in my heart for people living with HIV or AIDS. It came from a million years ago from a friend who had AIDS and was kind of shunned by his family. And I was really appalled at the way people treated him. People with whom he had positive relationships up to that point. And then, suddenly it was just like a light switch and he's a leper and they don't want anything to do with him. So at the time I was working actually at a basketball camp and hating every minute of it. But I was toiling away at that and kind of just thought that that was my fate. And I was donating money to AIDS related causes because I thought that's where my contribution could lie. September 11th happened, and my brother was in a building next door to the World Trade Center. And we were obviously frantic, having lost touch with him. And I was standing in front of the TV at my office watching the news, and my basketball boss said, "You going to do any work today, or are you just going to watch TV?" And I was like, maybe this is not the job for me. So I decided then and there it was time to try to find something that was more meaningful. And then, as luck would have it, literally the next day, there was an ad in the paper that AIDS Resource was looking for an executive director.
Wow.
I'm uniquely unqualified for that position. I didn't have any grant writing experience, any nonprofit experience, any fundraising experience. I think I got the job because nobody else really wanted it. My board will say that's not true, but the agency was in a pretty bad spot at the time, and I didn't know enough to ask those questions. So I kind of walked into it not knowing what to expect. But I think that in a strange way that my lack of experience or lack of knowledge or blissful ignorance really served us, because I think if I'd have known more, the agency had this huge debt and was really teetering on collapse. I think had I known more, I would have thought that this was an unsolvable problem, but because I didn't know anything, I didn't really know that we couldn't fix the problem, so we fixed it. So it was really a baptism by fire for me, but it was a great learning experience, and we came out the other side very strong and prepared to focus on more important things than just getting out of debt.
I want to talk about two things from that story.
Sure.
One is shitty bosses.
Oh, we should do a whole other series of podcasts on that.
Just the lack of empathy and care that, we're in this moment in history. 9/11 was one of those moments in history that no matter where you were in the world, you remember exactly where you were when those towers went down.
Yep.
And so for someone to be so cutthroat, so horrible in a moment when you don't know if your family is okay,
right.
is just mind-blowing, but it's not.
Right? But that was really a good moment of clarity for me. Like, if I'm going to have all of this stress, I should be doing something that's maybe a little more meaningful than basketball.
Yeah, it's one of those moments that gives you a life assessment. There was this life moment where just everything that was happening at work was not aligned to what was important to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and that brings me to the second piece, which is I always say in leadership, you don't know what you don't know till you know it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we're just these voracious, continuous learners. And so you didn't know what you didn't know till you knew it. And
Yep.
you trial by fired your way into creating this organization with some sustainability to it. As you learned about who you were and what kind of leader you were becoming, what did you see as, strengths in yourself that allowed you to learn through those moments to create this organization in a way that was sustainable, that is successful?
I think a lot of people, especially my family, is going to say this isn't necessarily a strength, but I'm incredibly bullheaded. And so I think in a situation like this, where you're looking at something that seems insurmountable, like, I just really wasn't ready to say, this can't be addressed, this can't be fixed. I really just had this sense of, if I just keep at it, we're going to get there. Looking back, I feel like that was unbelievably naive. But at the time, it got us through, and it got us to where we needed to be.
Yeah, we talk about balance a lot in leadership, balance of personal and professional life, balance of the emergencies with, strategic vision planning. How do you do that?
Well, I hope this is one of these cases where, like, I don't know what I don't know, and when I come out the other end, I'll tell you what I figured out. My goal is to try to reframe a lot of my thinking, and that the strategic thinking, the planning, all of that seems like it's not necessary right now, because these other things are necessary. But I think if I can reframe it in my head that is very necessary, and maybe if we did more of that, we wouldn't have so much of this to deal with. So that's my plan, is to just kind of reframe it in my head. I'm just going to have to block out time, and no matter what else is going on, like, these things have to be a priority. And I suspect that the emergencies will be just fine without my immediate attention all of the time.
I'm going to transition a little bit because when we first met, I usually ask this question about sharing an experience or an adventure with me that shows us how you navigate the world around you and how you maximize on your strengths. But when we first met, you actually told me a story that was incredibly unbelievable. And it was about, we were talking at the time, I think, about, work-life balance and what adventure really can look like in your life. And your story was a kind of adventure that I think most people don't think about. And I'd love for you to tell us about that with first talking about your husband.
Sure. So my husband, um, we moved. Unfortunately, he had this beautiful house in the country that was his family's house that he wanted to live in. I wouldn't move here. It was a constant source of stress. It was too far away from work for me. I couldn't possibly be 15 minutes away from work. But he finally wore me down, and we moved here about 5 years ago. And unfortunately, right around the time we moved in, he was diagnosed with a disease called myasthenia gravis, which is like a neuromuscular disease, and then subsequently also with Lewy body dementia. So we're now in the house that he has wanted to be in for 20 years, but he is completely bedridden. He requires 24-hour care. And because of the dementia, he's not always really cognizant of the fact that he's in the house that he so desperately wanted to be in.
Yeah. And then you were working outside of the home when you first moved there, right?
I was, yeah. We hired a caregiver, and in the 6 days that she worked for us, she managed to steal a couple of credit cards, including an agency credit card. She forged a check. She stole cash. She stole meds. She stole a gun. She stole my dead mother's diamond brooch and watch. All in 6 days. She was pretty productive. We didn't realize at the time that she'd stolen so much. It was first the forged check that caught our attention. I was at the office when we realized it. I called the police. When I got home, the police were already here. They'd already interviewed her. I thought it was strange when I got here that they were separating her and my husband, and that they had him on the porch and that she was inside. As it turns out, it's because that thief, as luck would have it, had been having an affair with the state police officer who just showed up to investigate. She was arrested later for breaking into a sub shop, and she had a bottle of my prescription pills in her pocket when she was arrested. He bailed her out of jail. He ended up getting rid of all of the evidence. He never filed any of our reports. So we ended up, again, because I'm bullheaded, and I ended up at the police department like at 3 o'clock in the morning one day, just demanding that somebody does something because this man will not call me back. Triggering, and then being in the middle of this ridiculous internal affairs investigation that covered, he had a whole lot of bad stuff going on with her, unrelated to us. They were also running a scam where she went to somebody that she knew who had some money. She goes with the cop in his state police car and says she's an undercover informant. They need to buy drugs, but the state budget's at a standstill. So will this guy give them money to buy drugs? And then, the state police will pay him back. They ended up robbing this guy of several $1,000s. All of which is to say, I don't leave my house anymore. I work from home now.
Oh my gosh. Did you
Yeah.
ever get any of your things back?
He did not get anything back.
Wow.
Nope.
I mean, just give us can you help us understand even what it's like to be in a place where you've been married for a long time? You have this husband that you have built a life with, and now you're in a home together in a new place. I mean, I can imagine you were a bull in a china shop when you got home and you were learning about how your husband was being treated.
Yes, I was. And then as, more things came uncovered, then he told me, like a couple days later, oh, well, and sometimes she left because she had to run personal errands. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I'm paying her to be here. I mean, there's this terrible sense of violation. But on top of it, I felt this guilt, like, well, I brought this person into my home to take care of him, and she wasn't doing that.
Well, thank God you figured it out.
Yeah, I am so lucky that I am able to work from home. This was all pre-COVID, so at the time we were all in the office all the time, and it really seemed like an incredible stretch to think that I would be able to work from home. Like that just seemed, I wasn't really sure there was going to be a way to work that out. But it turns out it actually works out great. And I think for me that I'm actually more effective being at home.
There's a debate about whether or not leaders, executive directors, C-suites should be home. That there's an argument that if you're managing people, you got to be together. You got to be the head of the organization. You have to be in the office.
Definitely creates a different kind of relationship when I'm in the office every day and they get to know me and they know what to expect. That's really different than they hear from me over email and they don't really know me. That's for sure the downside.
Yeah, I think, I managed teams online for about 5 years. And you have to put a lot of more intentional activity into your day to try to create that cohesion that kind of happens organically in person. You're absolutely right. It's doable, but you have to recognize that you have to put a little bit more effort in.
Yeah, for sure. And now other people are working from home. Also, we have a hybrid. And so it's definitely something that requires more attention, whereas before we were all just together naturally.
Is there a book or a podcast or a resource that you feel has helped you in your own journey?
There's a book by Joan Gary. I think it's called Nonprofits Are Messy. And if you work at a nonprofit and you don't know Joan Gary, you're welcome. She's really good at helping kind of rethink things to present problems in a new way that make the solution a little easier to see. But I think her biggest gift is that she just has the most amazing sense of humor.
Oh, I love that. Anything that can make you laugh when you feel like sometimes you want to cry.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Nonprofit work can be like that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm wondering, is there anything that you wish I would have asked you that I haven't, or something that we should know about you before we end our time together today?
I started a separate nonprofit that's completely unrelated to the work that I do at AIDS Resource, but I'm someone who generally likes to shop with my values. There are places that I will not shop because of the causes that they support. Except I have not been able to break up with Amazon. And I've got lots of good excuses lined up in my head. I can't leave my house. I'm, rural. We don't have places to shop anyway. But at the end of the day, I'm really uncomfortable with the way that Amazon treats its workers. And I hate that I'm a part of that. So the way that I've tried to alleviate my own guilt is that I've just started a new organization. It's called Amazon Offsets. And if you're somebody like me who shops at Amazon and wishes you didn't, you can make voluntary contributions to this organization. They are tax deductible. And then we use those contributions to make grants to Amazon employees who are suffering either threat of eviction, a shut-off notice, or have an unexpected medical bill. We actually just made our first grant. It was a woman who was fleeing domestic violence, a really horrible situation, but we were able to set her up in a safe place to live for 3 months and get a lot of her belongings were in storage. She wasn't able to get her IDs and things that she needed to kind of move forward with her new life. We were able to help with all of that. So she's in a new place, she's safe, and now I can buy all the nail polish I want without feeling guilty about it.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for hanging with me.
Thank you so much. This was really nice.
Thanks for joining us today in the Executives Lounge, where we bust open the doors, slam through the ceilings, and make sure that we have a spot at the table and that we are the lounge. You can find more podcast recordings and episodes at www.roamyoursoul.com. That's ROAM, roaming the world, finding amazing stories from amazing women, sharing their leadership skills and talents with us all over the globe.